Hey y'all, Caleb here. So in today's video, we're going to go through the options you can select when installing Git on your PC for the first time. So you're going to want to go to the Git website and download the latest version of the executable. I'll add a link in the description. And when you open it up, you're going to see their GPL, and what we're really concerned about here is this option to check whether you see new options or not. For people who have installed Git before and are doing an update, if you have this checked, it's only going to show you options that have been added since your last install or update. But we're going to leave it unchecked because we want to go through all the steps. On this page, you get to select some of the basic options, whether you want on the desktop, Windows Explorer integration, large file support, associating file types. This is my typical setup. I don't do the Git GUI just because I can handle Git inside of my IDEs or through third-party software like GitKraken. So the next thing that we have is choosing Git's default editor. And if we open up the drop-down, you'll see there are a lot of options. All of them are perfectly fine. But I'm choosing Visual Studio Code because it's a tool that I use a lot and that we'll be using in our videos. And so whenever you open up a Git ignore file, just open up Visual Studio. Makes it nice and easy. Our next option is a fairly new one, and typically when you create a Git repository, the default branch is called master. And so here we can let Git decide what that branch name is. Right now master, or we can override it and choose our own branch name. We're just going to leave it and let Git handle the naming. The next option is how we want to set up our path environment variables. You can use Git from Git Bash only. You can use it from the command line and third-party software, or you can use it with optional Unix tools from the command prompt. The recommended option is to do it from the command line, and it's the one that I use. We don't necessarily want to be limited to just Git Bash, and if we do it from the command line, we can do it inside VS Code. We can do it in PowerShell. So I find that this is the best option. Okay, next is how Git is going to handle HTTPS connections, or SSL. Your two options are OpenSSL and Windows Secure Channel Library. They basically do the same thing. If you are just doing some personal projects on GitHub, for instance, OpenSSL is just fine. If you are working in a company or an enterprise solution, and your IT department has their own certificates that need to be managed, then you'd want to select this option. I have it selected because I do work in a couple different environments, and just in case I need it, that works for me. Okay, so next. This option can lead to some disagreements in the developer community, and not necessarily which of these options you pick, but how picking these options can impact the way your commits look and the changes look. So first option is to check out Windows style and commit Unix style. Next option is to check out as is and commit Unix style. And the last option is to check out as is and commit as is. So the main difference here is that Windows and Unix handle their their carriage returns and line feeds differently. And if you haven't set a style guide or a way that you want your development team to handle, for instance, your tabs or indents, spacing, max line length, choosing one of these two can cause issues, just because when you open a file and make changes, it's going to restyle it or reflow it based on your settings. And if you go to commit it, you might see those styling changes on top of the actual real changes you made, which makes it hard to look at a commit and see what has changed. So I suggest you do as is, and for both checkout and commit, especially if you're working on a team and you have set up some styling configurations. This should work with no problems, and you won't get those styling changes that make it difficult to see what you actually did. Okay, next. So this is terminal emulator for Git Bash. You can use Mini TTY, which is the default terminal of MSys, or you can use Windows Default Console. Since we're going to be using the command line anyway and third-party tools, for me it just makes sense to have the Windows console selected. Okay, next. So when you're working in a Git repository, especially if you're working with a team, when you do a Git pull, it's going to do a number of different things. If you're on a branch that someone else had made changes to, it's actually going to look and see if you have changes in the works, if there's any conflicts. And so you might need to stash your changes and pull theirs down and then put yours on top of it. So some of the options when you're doing a pull is to do a fast forward or merge, to rebase, or to only ever fast forward. I do suggest the default. So what this does is when you do a pull, it'll fast forward the current branch to the version of the fetch branch. And if it can't do that, you can always do a merge commit, which will be a separate commit in the repo showing their changes and your changes merged together. The other primary option is do a rebase. And rebasing is something you need to be careful with. It really depends on the team you're working with. Rebase, instead of doing a merge commit, it will actually take the changes that you've done and put them on top of master as its own commit, as if you never created a separate branch at all. And it provides for a cleaner commit history, but you can also lose some information in the process. And if you want to see all the commits, you may not be able to get that using Rebase. And the last option is to fast forward, and that's just to go and try to fetch the branch, and if there's any problems, it fails. So I do suggest choosing the default, which is to fast forward or merge. This next option is Git's credential helper, and this has only been around for, I think, probably 2 years at this point, but it's helped me a good deal. When you're using Git, depending on the system you're using, GitHub Enterprise or Azure DevOps, you may be required to use a token for authentication. And in the past, that could be a little difficult, or you would have to reauthorize yourself on an ongoing basis. what Git Credential Manager allows you to do is when you connect to one of these services for the first time and you're doing that handshake, it will actually prompt you with basically passing you to their login mechanism, and you'll log in with your username and password. If you have two-factor auth, you can put that in. It can also manage tokens, and once you've done that, unless you need to make any changes or your token expires, it will hold on to that information. You won't have to do it every time, which makes life a lot easier. So I do suggest using the manager core. This manager is deprecated, so there's no reason to use it. And this credential manager is definitely not going to hurt, so I would use it instead of not. Okay, so our next two options are to enable file system caching and to enable symbolic links. File system caching really just helps speed up the performance of Git and whatever tool you're using to view your repos, especially if your repos get larger, which they can do if you're working for a company or you've got a number of developers working on the same project. So I would definitely turn that on. Symbolic links really isn't something that I use a lot with repositories. In Windows, a symbolic link is kind of like a shortcut, but it's not. So, for instance, a symbolic link is actually the file itself, or a representation of the file, without actually being the file itself. So it links to that item without having to have two copies of it on your PC. Whereas with a shortcut, if you click on it, it just takes you to the item. And so symbolic links work for files and folders, but I don't find a need to use them in my Git repos. Okay, and the last option is to enable experimental support for pseudo consoles. This is actually not something that I have done. I actually don't do a lot of work with Node or Python outside of npm package manager, so I don't have this checked. But if you do use Git and you are using this experimental option, I'd like to hear your experiences with it. So leave me a comment and let me know. Okay, and then so we're going to do the install. And it's going to install all the files it needs and the options you've selected. And then once it's done, if you like, you can view the release notes. We're not going to in this case. And you click finish. And then we're just gonna open up PowerShell, and we're just gonna do git dash version, and you see we are currently running Git version 2.29.2.windows.2, which matches the executable we installed. And so that's it on the options you have for installing Git on your PC. I hope it helped, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye, y'all.